Okay, in this video, we're going to go through two accounts receivable ratios. First being days sales outstanding, and the second being expected credit quality. So let's take a look. First, we'll do days sales outstanding. And this, what is this ratio meant to show you? Well, how many days does it take you, as a company, to collect money from your customers? That's what we're trying to get at with this ratio. And to calculate the ratio, we take accounts receivable, and that's, by the way, that's gross accounts receivable. And we divide by total credit sales, okay? Then we'll multiply by the number of days in the period relating to the sales, okay? So however many days of sales you include is the number of days that you include over here. And I'll just show you an example, and that'll help clarify it. So we'll calculate days sales outstanding for two companies, Chevron and Whiting Petroleum. And let me just change to a green color here. Okay, so Chevron and Whiting Petroleum, these are both oil and gas companies. Chevron is significantly bigger than Whiting. And what we're going to do is compute days sales outstanding for these two companies and just kind of compare and contrast. So first for Chevron, you can see the first part there is their balance sheet, and you can see they have accounts and notes receivable less an allowance of $849 for 2019. And that's 9247, and that's in millions, so it's 9,247,000,000. So let's first start with the numerator here, which is gross accounts receivable. And so gross accounts receivable in this case is the 9247 plus the $849 million allowance, okay? That is gross accounts receivable, and we're putting that in the numerator. In the denominator, we go to the income statement, and we need total credit sales. And what we'll do is just assume. We're going to just assume that this company sells all of their products on credit, okay? And that's usually a fine assumption, but it's an assumption you'll have to think about when you're evaluating this ratio. So we're just going to assume that total sales is equal to total credit sales. And so the denominator is just going to be 139,865,000,000. And so here's the ratio, and we're multiplying by 365 days because this income statement is for the year ended December 31st. And so that is a year, that's 139 billion, that's a year's worth of sales. And that is why we're multiplying by 365 days. Now let's just get an intuitive feeling for this ratio quickly, okay? So the numerator here is how much do your customers owe you as of the end of the year? And the denominator is how much do your customers owe you for all days in the year. So how much are you holding now divided by how much total did you sell throughout the entire year. And I think what you can see is you're getting what percentage of the year is still left unpaid. What percentage of the year is still left unpaid is just the fraction there. And if you multiply that by 365 days, you're getting a percentage of 365 days that you're holding in accounts receivable. And so that's 26 days for Chevron. Okay, let's quickly calculate this for Whiting Petroleum. So let's go to Whiting Petroleum's balance sheet and their accounts receivable account. They have an allowance of, and this is in thousands, so that would be an allowance of $9 million. On net accounts receivable of $308 million. And so gross accounts receivable is the 308 plus the 9, and that's in the numerator. And then we go to the income statement to get their total sales, which we're assuming, again, is total credit sales, and that's 1.5 billion. And when you multiply that fraction by 365 days, you get 74 days. And so this is a significant difference between Chevron and Whiting. One way to interpret this is that Chevron is a powerful company, and so they can collect money from their customers more quickly than Whiting can because they have more power, okay? But there are also many ways that this ratio can get biased, okay? And for example, one way that the ratio can get biased is suppose Chevron acquires another company in the middle of 2019, okay? Well, if they acquire it in the middle of 2019, this sales number is only going to represent about half of that new company's sales for the full year 2019 because they acquired it halfway through the year. But this end of year accounts receivable balance is going to represent 100% of the acquired company's accounts receivable. So you can see how transactions such as an acquisition have the potential to bias this ratio. And so you always need to be careful when you interpret ratios like this to make sure you understand the biases within it. So that's days sales outstanding. And the interpretation is how many days does it take to collect revenue from your customers? Okay, the final ratio we'll do is expected credit quality. And this is pretty simple. Expected credit quality just means how creditworthy are your customers. And it's expected because it relies on a management estimate. And to calculate expected credit quality, the way I typically do it is by taking net accounts receivable and dividing by gross accounts receivable. So how much receivables do you expect to collect divided by how much receivables are you owed? And so let's look at Nordstrom versus Target. Nordstrom had January 29, 2011 accounts receivable, net of allowance of 145 of 2026. And so this 2026 is net accounts receivable, and so that'll go in the numerator. And the denominator is gross accounts receivable, which is 2026 plus 145. And so Nordstrom in 2011 expected to collect 93% of their accounts receivable. Target, okay, net accounts receivable is right here, credit card receivables of 6153, that's what they expect to collect. So that 6153 goes in the numerator. And the denominator is gross accounts receivable, so 6153 plus the allowance of 690. And Target expects to collect 90%. So what's the interpretation here? Well, the interpretation is that Nordstrom, at least they expect to have higher customer quality, credit quality, than Target. So Nordstrom customers are more likely to pay than Target customers, but only by a little, right? So Nordstrom expects 93% of their customers will pay. Target expects 90% of their customers will pay. And those are the two ratios related to accounts receivable that I wanted to highlight.